Every night at exactly 3 a.m., something tapped on my bedroom window. I lived on the second floor, and there was nowhere for anything to stand. Part 1. The first week nobody would believe. I used to think the scariest stories started with something dramatic. A scream, a missing person, a break-in, blood on a floor. A 911 call. That's how movies teach you fear works. Something terrible happens, and then the story begins. Real fear doesn't usually arrive like that. Real fear starts with something so small you almost feel stupid noticing it. A sound you can't place. A shadow you don't remember being there. A reflection that seems off by half a second. A feeling that you are not as alone as the room says you are. That's how it started for me. 3 soft taps on a bedroom window. Nothing more. At least at first. Back then, I was 28, living alone in a second-floor apartment in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where every building looked like it had been approved by committee: beige siding, dark shingles, cheap outdoor lights with yellow bulbs, parking lots full of sedans, pickup trucks, and the occasional work van with faded company lettering on the side. A strip mall 5 minutes away, a gas station on the corner. A diner with laminated menus and bad coffee that somehow still had regulars every morning. It was not the kind of place where you expected a story to happen, it was the kind of place people moved to when they were between versions of their life. That was me. I had just gotten out of a long relationship, not a dramatic breakup, nothing explosive, no cheating, no screaming, no shattered plates, no social media fallout, just one of those adult endings where 2 people sit across from each other and quietly admit that love isn't doing the work anymore. Those breakups are the worst because nobody gets to be the villain. You just lose a future you have been speaking about like it already existed. So I moved out. New apartment. New routines. New grocery store. New key on my keychain. New silence. I worked remote IT support for a medical billing company, which meant my life had become painfully structured and emotionally empty at the same time. I woke up, made coffee, logged in, fixed problems for strangers who were mad at their printers or forgot how passwords worked, logged off, microwaved dinner or picked up takeout, watched something mediocre, and went to bed. That was it. No mystery, no omen. No weird family history, no belief in anything supernatural. I didn't believe in haunted houses. I didn't believe in cursed land. I didn't believe in things that wait outside windows. If somebody had told me a story like mine before it happened to me, I probably would have been polite enough not to laugh in their face. The first night it happened was a Tuesday in late October. I remember that because Wednesday was payroll lock, and I had to be up early for a meeting I didn't want to be in. I'd gone to bed around midnight after falling asleep halfway through some crime documentary on streaming. The TV had turned itself off. The apartment was dark, the heat clicked on once around 2-something, and I must have shifted under the blankets because the next thing I remember is waking halfway, not fully, just enough to know that something had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft. So soft that if I had been more tired, I probably would have folded it into a dream and gone right back under. I didn't open my eyes immediately. I just listened. There's a strange part of the mind that wakes before the rest of you does. That part started sorting through explanations before I was even fully conscious. Branch. Bird. Something loose outside, maybe a seed pod hitting the glass. Then the logical part caught up and rejected all of those at once. No tree near the window. No balcony. No fire escape. No overhang. No reason for anything to be making that sound from that exact spot. I opened my eyes and looked at the clock on the dresser. 3 a.m., the room was almost completely dark except for the red glow of the digits and the faint blue standby light on the TV. My bedroom window was to the right of the bed. Closed blinds, thin little lines of parking lot light leaking through the slats. Then it came again, tap, tap, tap. Right against the glass. I sat up. Not scared yet, just irritated, confused. The kind of confusion that still assumes it's about to become something ordinary. I got out of bed and stood there for a second, in the dark, staring at the blinds. I remember feeling this tiny, ridiculous hesitation before touching them, and that hesitation embarrasses me even now because it meant some animal part of me already knew I didn't want to see what was on the other side. Then I laughed quietly at myself, reached out, and tilted one slat open. Nothing. Just the weak-lit back lot behind the building, grass, fence, darkness beyond the fence where a drainage ditch ran behind the property. No movement, no person, no sound. No ladder leaned against the wall, no prank. No explanation, but also nothing visible. I pulled the blind wider, still nothing. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, looking harder than necessary, waiting for my eyes to adjust and reveal whatever obvious answer I had missed. Nothing. Finally I shut the blind and went back to bed, and that's the detail I always come back to when people ask why I didn't react more strongly right away, because most fear doesn't announce itself as fear, it arrives wearing the clothes of inconvenience. At breakfast the next morning I had almost convinced myself it was part of a dream. By lunch, I joked about it to my friend Marcus over Slack. I typed, "Weird question, what kind of bird taps on a second-floor window at 3 a.m.? He replied almost instantly, "A demon woodpecker." Then, "Or a raccoon with manners." Then, "Bro, if you die I'm taking your monitor." I laughed, sent back a middle finger emoji, and went back to work. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The second night, it happened again. Exactly 3 a.m. This time, I woke faster, like some part of me had been waiting for it. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. I lay flat on my back, eyes open in the dark, listening so hard that my own breathing became annoying. The clock read 3 o'clock. The apartment was silent. Then, tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm, same softness, same exact place on the window. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight even though the blinds were closed and some rational part of me knew that wasn't going to help. Fear doesn't care about logical tool selection, fear just wants something in your hand. I crossed the room, yanked the blinds open, and lit up the window. Nothing outside. But this time, near the center right of the outer pane, I saw 3 small smudges. Just faint grease marks. 3 points, like fingertips. I leaned closer. My own face reflected back at me in the glass, pale and stupid looking in the beam of the flashlight. I pressed my hand to the inside of the pane and lined my fingers up with the marks on the outside. They were a little too high. Not impossibly high. Just wrong enough to matter. I checked the ground below the next morning. No footprints. No trash can dragged over. No ladder. No sign that anyone had been back there at all. That day, work dragged. Every minor problem felt heavier than usual. Every time I caught my own reflection in the black monitor during a loading screen, I thought of the window. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped more than I should have. The lack of sleep didn't help, but it wasn't just lack of sleep. Something had entered my routine, not physically yet, not in a way I could prove, but mentally. My life now had a point on the clock I was moving toward all day. 3 a.m. had become a destination. The third night, I decided to stay awake. I drank an energy drink, left the bathroom light on, and sat up in bed with my laptop open on some stupid video essay I wasn't really watching. I kept checking the time in the corner of the screen, 2:41, 2:48, 2:53, 2:58, at 2:59, I muted the laptop. The room turned unnaturally still. I could hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, a truck very far away. Water shifting somewhere in the pipes in the wall. Then even those little apartment sounds seemed to pull back. The clock changed. 3 o'clock, and right away, tap, 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 so close I felt it in my shoulders. I turned my head slowly toward the blinds. And behind them, only for a second, maybe less, I thought I saw something blocking the faint light outside. Not detail, not a face. Not even a clear silhouette. Just presence. Something upright and still, directly outside the window. I was across the room before I consciously decided to move. I grabbed the blinds, snapped one of the slats in the process, and ripped them open. The window looked out over empty night. Nothing there. Nothing moving. But the outside of the glass was fogged in one high oval patch, and in that fog was the flattened suggestion of a face that had been pressed there from the other side. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not because I saw something clearly, because I didn't, because whatever had been there had been close enough to leave shape behind, but not close enough to remain when I looked. That was when the story began. And once it began, it did not let me return to the version of my life that existed before that window.
Part 2. The shape behind the blinds. After the third night, I started organizing my whole life around proof. That sounds dramatic, but it wasn't dramatic at the time. It felt practical, necessary, the kind of thing any sane person would do if they were being forced into an insane experience. I bought a cheap indoor security camera from Walmart and set it on the dresser facing the bedroom window. I tested the feed from my phone. It worked fine, clear image, even in low light. Motion detection on, audio on, backup notifications on. That night I sat in the living room with the TV muted, staring at the camera feed on my phone like an idiot. 2:54, 2:57, 2:59. The bedroom sat there on the screen looking completely normal. My bed, my dresser, the curtains, the window. At exactly 3 a.m., the feed froze. Not buffered, not lagged. Froze. The timestamp stopped moving. A second later the app crashed. I cursed, stood up so fast I knocked my water over, and ran into the bedroom. Nothing. The room was dark and still. The window looked ordinary again. The camera, however, had shut itself off. Battery dead. It had been charged above 80%. I stared at it in my hand and felt that same sick cognitive split from the window. One part of me insisting there had to be a normal explanation, another part of me already stepping backward from normal without permission. The next day I bought a better camera. Then I set up my phone as a second recording angle. Then I put an old tablet on the nightstand as a third. I wasn't just trying to catch whatever was happening anymore, I was trying to outrun the humiliation of not being believed. That night, all three devices failed differently. The camera powered off. My phone file saved, but the video from 2:59:40 to 3:01:13 became a green and black smear of digital tearing. The tablet kept recording audio but no usable image. When I played the audio back, beneath my own breathing in the faint room tone, there was a clicking noise. 3 clicks. Pause.
3 clicks. Pause. Not random static, rhythm. Intentional rhythm. I listened to it 10 times in a row before throwing the tablet onto the bed and pacing the apartment like anger could produce sense. The next morning, I called maintenance under the excuse that maybe the window frame had some issue and was making a repeated sound when the temperature changed at night. The guy who came out was named Ron, probably in his 50s, former military by posture if not by actual history. The kind of maintenance worker who walked into a room already looking mildly disappointed in whatever you were about to report. He checked the seals, the track, the outer trim, the wall around it. He looked down from the window and said, "Nobody's getting up here without a ladder. Could they use one and move it fast?" He looked at me, "Fast enough to disappear before you open the blinds?" I didn't answer. He straightened up, brushed his hands off, and said, "Window looks fine." That night I moved to the couch in the living room. No tapping. I almost cried from relief. The night after that, I slept on the couch again, still nothing. So on the third night, I told myself I had solved it. Something about the bedroom, some weird auditory thing. Apartment stress, maybe the water pipes lined up differently through that wall. Maybe the breakup had me more wound up than I wanted to admit. Maybe loneliness does strange things when you give it silence and darkness. I felt embarrassed for how far my mind had already gone, then I slept in the bedroom again. At exactly 3 a.m., tap. 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 Same sound, same place. Same cold feeling under my skin like my body recognized the moment faster than my brain did. The couch hadn't solved anything, the thing wanted that room. Or it wanted me in that room. That's when I stopped treating the experience like a nuisance and started treating it like a pattern. I bought a notebook. Every night I wrote the date, weather, moon phase, what time I went to bed, whether I had consumed caffeine, whether I had the TV on, what position I slept in, whether the heat kicked on, how many taps I heard, how long the pauses were, whether I opened the blinds immediately, whether I felt anything before the sound. Fear turns people into data collectors when they still think data can save them. The pattern was brutally consistent. Always around 3 o'clock, always the bedroom window. Always 3 taps. The differences were subtler. Some nights the taps were patient, some nights more deliberate. One night there was a slow scrape down the glass after the second set. Another night, there was a single light knock 2 minutes early. As if whatever was out there knew I was waiting and wanted me awake for the real one. That early knock scared me more than the others, because it suggested adjustment, not haunting as repetition. Haunting as response. I started asking around in little ways. I asked my downstairs neighbor, Denise, if she'd noticed anyone in the back lot late at night. Denise was maybe mid-60s, always in slippers, always carrying some reusable grocery bag, with one of those faces that could be warm or hard depending on whether she thought you were wasting her time. She looked up at me from over her glasses and said, no, and if there was someone creeping around out there, Peanut would lose his mind. Peanut was her terrier mix, a nervous wiry little dog who barked at delivery vans, lawn crews, teenagers, and leaves with equal civic dedication. That same night, I heard Peanut growling through the floor. Not barking, growling, low, continuous. Wrong. It started below my living room, moved slowly like he was tracking something, then settled under what felt like the exact footprint of my bedroom. Then it stopped all at once. I stood over the bedroom vent, listening with my heart pounding in my neck. At 3 a.m., the tapping came. I didn't open the blinds that night. I just sat there in the dark, gripping the edge of the mattress, while the sound repeated. After the third set, I whispered, "Who's there?" I don't know why. Maybe because the room had stopped feeling empty in a way words alone couldn't contain. Nothing answered, but from the hallway, outside the bedroom, one floorboard creaked. Just once. So softly it might have been the apartment settling. Except it sounded like weight shifting, like someone had heard me ask the question from inside my own home. I turned on every light and left them on until sunrise. The next day, I called my sister Jenna. Jenna was 4 years older than me, and built from entirely different emotional material. Married, 2 kids. Practical. The kind of person who made lists for road trips and always had tissues in her bag. And never panicked until after the problem was already solved. I almost didn't tell her the truth. I almost just said I hadn't been sleeping well, but she asked me, "What's wrong with your voice?" And that was enough. So, I told her, not the whole thing, just the version that still sounded survivable. Tapping at the window. The second floor, no explanation. She listened without interrupting, which was somehow worse than if she had laughed. Then, she said, "Have you called the police?" And say what? Say someone is repeatedly at your window at night. There's nowhere to stand. A pause, then, quieter. Okay. That part is bad. Yes. Are you joking with me? No. Longer silence. Then, you need to come stay with me. I told her no. That answer embarrasses me now, but pride survives in strange places. I didn't want to be the guy who got chased out of his apartment by tapping. I wanted proof. I wanted an explanation. I wanted reality to line back up in front of me. Instead, it bent further. A few days later, I was on a work video call, screen sharing with a client while he complained about VPN access like it was a moral injury. My own camera preview was tucked in the corner of the screen. Behind me, in the reflection on the turned-off TV in my bedroom, something moved past the doorway. Not fast, not clearly. Just enough motion to register as a figure crossing. I turned instantly. Nothing there, no sound, no footsteps, empty hall. The client asked, "Everything okay?" I said, "Yeah, cat knocked something." I didn't own a cat. The lie came out so quickly it scared me. Because it meant some part of me had already adjusted to covering for the impossible. That night I sat awake in bed again, but this time with the lamp off, the room stripped quiet, my phone recording audio, and both hands free because I had finally accepted that if the blinds needed to open fast, I didn't want to be fumbling with a flashlight. 2:57. 2:59. At 2:59:30, before the clock turned, a single soft knock touched the glass. Tap. Then nothing. Then the minute changed. 3 o'clock. And I saw it, not in full, not in a way I could sketch later with certainty, but through the closed blinds, blocking the thin slats of light, there was an outline. Tall. Too tall. Still enough to seem placed there, rather than standing there. I moved before I decided to. I tore the blinds open with both hands. For less than a second, there was something pale and narrow directly outside the window, head tilted wrong, arms too low, face either featureless or too flat for my panicked eyes to make sense of. Then it was gone. The outside glass, however, was fogged, and in that fog, centered high on the pane, were the pressed remains of a face. Not a full detailed faceprint, something worse. A partial impression, a forehead, a cheek, a place where something had been close enough to breathe or press, or exist against the glass, while I was only feet away on the other side. I stumbled back and hit the dresser hard enough to knock the camera onto the floor. That was the moment I stopped asking whether something was happening. The only question left was what it wanted. Part 3. It learned the sounds of my life. If fear were only about what you see, people would survive it more easily. Seeing something terrible is awful. But hearing something that should not know you, that's worse. After the faceprint night, the apartment changed, not physically, that's important. The furniture stayed where it was, the walls stayed the same boring off-white color. The bathroom fan still rattled slightly when it ran, the fridge still made the same little clicking hum in the kitchen. Daylight still made everything look laughably ordinary. But the emotional architecture of the place changed completely. The bedroom was no longer just where I slept. It had become a point of contact. The hallway was no longer just a hallway, it became distance something could cross. The TV screen, microwave door, black phone display, bathroom mirror, everything reflective became suspect. And the sounds changed. The tapping was still there, but now it was joined by other things. A soft exhale from the hallway when I was brushing my teeth, a faint shift of weight in the living room after I had turned the lights out. The sound of fingers brushing fabric near the closet door when the apartment was otherwise perfectly still. Some nights nothing happened until 3 o'clock, some nights the feeling started around midnight and built slowly, the way storm pressure builds in the years before rain. I stopped sleeping normally. I started dozing in short bursts on the couch, with all the lights on, then jerking awake because I thought I heard a knock that never came. My work performance got bad enough that my manager asked during a one-on-one if everything was okay at home, and the way he said at home made me realize how unwell I must have looked. Marcus invited me out for wings and beer one Friday and kept making jokes until he saw I was barely following the conversation. "You okay?" he asked, finally dropping the grin. "Yeah." "No, seriously." I stirred ice in my soda and looked out at the parking lot of the sports bar. "I'm not sleeping." "Because of the window thing?" I nodded. He smirked once, like he was about to joke again, then didn't. "You still hearing it?" "Every night." He waited. Then, "You think it's a person?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted a person so badly. A stalker was terrifying, but a stalker obeyed the known world. Instead, I said, "I think it wants me to look." Marcus stared at me for a second and said, "That is the least helpful sentence I've heard in years." I laughed, but it came out wrong. When I got home that night, I found myself standing in the bedroom doorway long after I should have gone in. Just looking at the room. The bed. The window. The dresser. The slack curtain. The black mirror of the TV screen. People talk about haunted spaces like they're loud. They aren't always.
Sometimes the worst thing about them is how much they dare you to call them normal. Around 1:15 a.m., I heard something that made my blood go cold. A woman laughing. Not a full laugh. Not loud. Just a small, airy little laugh from the dark hallway outside the bedroom. I froze where I stood. It wasn't TV bleed from another apartment. It wasn't a phone. It wasn't outside. It was in my hallway. And what made it truly horrible was this. It sounded enough like my ex to hurt. Not perfect. Not exact. But close in the way memory is close. Close the way someone might imitate a person based on emotional residue instead of actual voice. I didn't move for a long time. At 3 o'clock, the window tapped. I never even made it to the blinds. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed while the sound repeated, each set slower than the last, as if whatever was outside no longer needed urgency. The next day, I started researching the property. It began as a rational search. Crime reports, trespassing complaints, neighborhood rumors, prior police calls. Then it widened. Land records, county parcel history, archived newspaper references, old forum posts where locals traded ghost stories ironically, until one detail got specific enough to matter. That was how I learned my apartment complex had not always been there. Before the current buildings, before the drainage ditch was cleaned up and fenced, before the parking lot and the ornamental shrubs and the cheap sign out front with the complex name in peeling fake bronze letters, there had been a house on that land. A single-family home set farther back than the buildings were now. Built in the 1950s, sold twice, then tied to an unresolved disappearance in the winter of 1987. That alone would have been enough to unsettle me, but one detail appeared in more than one place. A phrase passed around in local discussion boards and in a scanned letter to the editor from 1988. The thing outside the upstairs window. The exact language varied. Some called it a man, some called it a shape. One post from years later said an older resident used to warn kids not to look out second-floor windows after 3 o'clock. Most of it sounded like folklore built on rumor. But rumor has a texture when it's fed by truth. I could feel it. That afternoon I talked to Denise again. This time she didn't pretend not to know what I meant. She stood in my kitchen, Peanut refusing to cross the threshold behind her, and asked, "Has it stayed at the window?" That question changed everything. Because now it wasn't just me versus my own perception. Now another person was quietly confirming pattern. I said, "What does that mean?" She looked toward the hallway and lowered her voice the way people do in hospitals and churches. "It starts there," she said. My mouth went dry. What starts there? She took too long to answer. Then, most people leave before they find out. I wanted details. I wanted names, dates, anything concrete enough to pin the fear to. But Denise wasn't a storyteller. She was a woman who had lived near something disturbing long enough to prefer partial truths over full ones. Over the next 10 minutes, she gave me pieces. A tenant years ago in my same unit who broke lease suddenly and told Denise never to answer the window if she heard it tapping. Another resident in a different building who complained that someone kept standing in his son's room doorway at night after weeks of hearing knocks from outside. A rumor that the back-facing second-floor units were worse. The word worse stayed with me. Not active, not haunted, not creepy. Worse. That night I made a decision I thought was smart. I booked a motel 20 minutes away. If it was tied to the apartment, distance would stop it. If it was tied to me, I would know. The motel was off the interstate, one of those bland two-story places with ice machines that rattle outside and hallway carpets that smell faintly of bleach and cigarettes no matter how many years smoking has been banned. I checked in with one backpack and felt ridiculous doing it, like I was fleeing a noise complaint. At 3 a.m., I woke up on my own. No tapping. Just the AC unit buzzing under the window. I waited. Nothing. I slept again. The next morning I felt relief so sharp it bordered on joy. Maybe it really was the apartment. Maybe the property itself was wrong, but wrong in a geographic way. Contained, avoidable, local. I drove back at noon, feeling stupid but hopeful. That hope lasted until sunset. Because when I entered my apartment, the first thing I noticed was that the bedroom curtain was partially open. I had closed it fully before leaving, I was sure of that. I stood in the doorway staring at the narrow gap between the fabric panels. A stupid detail, easy to dismiss.
But the air in the room felt occupied, not crowded, not heavy, just recently used, like someone had been standing there very quietly and had stepped away just before I arrived. I almost left again. Instead, I walked to the window, closed the curtain, and checked the outer pane. 3 fresh smudges. Too high, too narrow. That was the day I started to understand the real shape of the problem. It did not need me asleep. It did not need me present. And it was becoming less interested in the window as a barrier. It had begun using the sounds and details of my own life, and once something learns your life, place stops mattering as much as recognition does.
Part 4. The house that burned. Before the apartments were built.
There is a certain kind of dread that comes from discovering a thing has a history. Random horror is one kind of terror, pattern horror is worse. Because, once a thing has happened before, it stops feeling like a nightmare and starts feeling like a system you've wandered into too late. I spent the next several days digging into the property history with the kind of focus usually reserved for addicts and people trying to prove a conspiracy. I called county offices on my lunch break. I searched deed transfers. I looked through old newspapers at the public library because digital archives are terrible unless you already know exactly what you're looking for. Eventually, I found enough to sketch the outline. Before the apartments, there had been a house. Before the cleaned-up drainage ditch, there had been low marshy ground that flooded badly in winter and spring. In late 1987, a family living their father, mother, son disappeared. Months later, part of the house was damaged by a fire, the remains were demolished. The land sat vacant for years before development, that much I could confirm. The harder part was the part that mattered. The calls. An older retired dispatcher, whom I reached after being transferred through 2 departments and speaking to 3 people who didn't want to help, agreed to talk off the record because he was retired enough not to care and maybe lonely enough to enjoy being remembered as a source. He told me there had been multiple late-night disturbance calls from that address before the disappearance. What kind of disturbance? I asked. He said, man at the window. I felt cold instantly, someone trying to break in. That's what patrol thought the first time. And after that? He paused. After that, they didn't know what they thought. According to him, the father had insisted there was someone standing outside the upstairs window looking into the boy's bedroom. The first responding officers found no ladder. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, no trespasser. The second time, same result. The father became increasingly agitated. The mother reportedly told someone, maybe police, maybe a relative. The dispatcher wasn't sure, that the son had begun waking before the tapping started, as if he knew it was coming. That detail hit me so hard I had to sit down, because by then, that had started happening to me, too. I would wake at 2:58 without an alarm, every night. Not because I heard something, because my body had become tuned to its arrival. The dispatcher kept talking. He said neighbors later claimed strange things after the family vanished. Lights in the upstairs room, a silhouette at the rear window. A complaint from a nearby property owner who said he saw a tall person in the lot where the house sat even after the fire damage made the structure inaccessible. Was any of it confirmed? I asked. No. Do you believe it? He laughed once, not kindly, not unkindly. Belief doesn't matter much after enough calls. That sentence stayed with me. Belief doesn't matter much after enough calls. The official story of the family disappearance was unclear enough to invite rumor. Some said the father snapped. Some said they fled in the night and were never found. Some said the fire destroyed evidence. But none of those stories explained why the same detail surfaced over and over across decades, something outside an upstairs window at night, waiting to be noticed. I brought all of this to Marcus over coffee one Saturday because I had reached the point where keeping it in my head alone felt more dangerous than sounding insane out loud. He listened surprisingly carefully. Then he said, okay, best case. You're dealing with some local legend people have built into their brains, and now it's in yours, too. Best case. Worst case, he said, there is something actually interacting with you. I rubbed my face. That's not comforting.
I'm not trying to be comforting. He looked at me for a second. Come stay with me. I almost said yes. Instead I said, one more week. Marcus stared at me. Why? Because I wanted proof. Because I was angry. Because some pathetic part of me wanted to win. Because leaving without understanding felt like surrender to something I couldn't even name. I didn't say any of that. I just said, I need to know what it is. Marcus leaned back and said, that sentence is how every horror movie starts going bad. He wasn't wrong. That night, the apartment felt different from the second I entered it. Not louder, not darker. Just expectant. I covered the bedroom mirror with a towel. I unplugged the TV because I couldn't stand the screen reflecting the room. I checked the locks 3 times. I set up my phone to record audio only because by then video had become more disturbing than useful. At 11:40 p.m., standing in the kitchen, I heard someone whisper my name from the hallway. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just my name, in a voice close enough to human to be worse than monstrous. I did not answer. At 12:15, I heard a soft knock from inside the bedroom closet. 3 times. At 1:07, the bathroom door, which I had left half open, moved wider by an inch. At 1:52, Peanut downstairs began growling again. At 2:31, I heard what sounded like my sister's voice from the living room say, very softly, "Don't open it tonight." I was alone. I knew I was alone. But hearing a familiar voice in an empty apartment activates something older than logic. For half a second my body nearly obeyed before my mind caught up. By 2:58 I was standing in the bedroom doorway, unable to make myself get closer to the window. At 3 o'clock, the tapping came. Tap. 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 Then again, tap. 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 Then, from behind me, from the dark hall leading toward the living room, in my own voice, perfectly calm, "Come look." I spun around. Empty hall. When I turned back, the curtain over the window moved inward slightly, as if someone had just passed through it. Not the whole curtain, just a small, inward breath. The window was still locked. Nothing visible was there, but the room no longer felt divided between inside and outside in any meaningful way. That was the night I understood the old calls differently. The man outside the upstairs window had never been the whole event. The window was just where it taught people to see it. Part 5. The night it stopped. Staying outside. I think most people imagine terror escalating in obvious steps. First the window, then the door, then the room, then attack. That's not how it happened. It was subtler. Worse, because subtle terror gives you room to doubt yourself even while it changes your life. After the hallway voice night, I stopped feeling safe in any room with a reflective surface. I covered the microwave door with a dish towel. I kept my phone face down. I used the bathroom mirror only with all the lights on and the door open. The apartment began to look like someone halfway through either a move or a breakdown. Maybe both. Jenna came to visit one afternoon because I had stopped answering enough calls for her to trust me unsupervised. She stepped into the apartment, looked around at the covered surfaces, the stacked half-packed boxes, the curtains clipped shut, and said, "You're not okay." "No. Then you're coming with me tonight. I just need to grab a few more things first." She looked at me the way only older sisters can look at younger brothers when they know you're lying and are too tired to argue about which part. "Why are you still here?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was ugly. Because by then the fear had become attached to the idea that if I left without understanding, it would follow unfinished. And somewhere in me, against all self-interest, I believed naming it would protect me. That night Jenna stayed. For a while, having another person in the apartment made everything feel normal again. We ordered takeout from a chain grill down the road. We sat in the living room with too many lights on and talked about trivial things on purpose, her kids' school schedules, my terrible eating habits, the fact that I still hadn't assembled the cheap bookshelf leaning against my wall. Human conversation shrinks certain kinds of fear. It reminds the room it belongs to the living. At 2:45 a.m., neither of us had admitted we were waiting. At 2:58, Jenna said,
trying to sound casual, "Maybe it only happens when you're alone." At 3 o'clock, 3 taps hit the bedroom window. We both flinched. No debate remained after that. She stood up first. We walked to the bedroom together. The room was dark except for light from the hallway behind us. The curtain hung still over the blinds. The air felt charged in that weird flattened way I had come to recognize. Then the tapping came again. Tap, tap, tap. Jenna whispered, "Don't open it yet." I listened, mostly because hearing fear in her voice made my own feel less embarrassing. Then, from the window side of the room, from directly behind the curtain, we heard my voice say softly, "Come here." Perfectly. Not close. Not similar. Exact. Jenna grabbed my arm so hard her nails bit through my sleeve. The curtain moved. Slowly. As though something behind it were tracing one hand down the fabric. Then, very distinctly, 3 knocks came from the inside of the room, not on the outer glass, on the interior window frame. Jenna pulled me backward out of the room so hard I almost lost my footing. We shut the bedroom door and stood in the living room in full light, both breathing too fast to speak. A minute later she said, "You're leaving, today." I didn't argue. That morning Marcus came over to help pack because I finally texted him something closer to the truth than I ever had before. It isn't just outside anymore. He didn't reply with a joke. He just came. We packed in daylight, which should have made the apartment seem harmless, but daylight only made the signs more insulting. Everything looked so ordinary. My shoes by the door, dish soap by the sink. Half a loaf of bread on the counter. A hoodie on the chair. The life I had been living looked intact, right up until the point where it wasn't. When Marcus went into the bedroom to unplug the camera and grab a bag from under the bed, he went still. "What?" I said. He stared at the window. "There are prints." I stepped in beside him. There were long, pale, oily hand marks on the outside glass. Too high, too narrow. Not fresh, but recent enough that sunlight caught them at an angle. Marcus backed out of the room without another word. By late afternoon my essentials were in Jenna's SUV. I turned in notice, lost money on the lease, and didn't care. Ron from maintenance avoided my eyes when I mentioned I was moving earlier than planned. Denise only said, "Good," which somehow scared me more than pity would have. I thought leaving would end it. For a few days, it almost seemed to. I stayed with Jenna and her family in Indianapolis, different state, different house. More people. More noise. More life. Kids in the morning, dishes clattering, TV cartoons. School backpacks by the door. A dog 2 houses down. Barking at mail trucks every afternoon. The sheer density of ordinary family routine felt like medicine. I slept in the guest room on the 2nd floor. The first night, no tapping. Second night, nothing. Third night, still nothing. I began to breathe like a person again. Not fully. But enough to imagine maybe the property had been the anchor. Maybe that specific place had been wrong, and distance had severed whatever line existed. Then, one afternoon, Jenna asked me why I had been standing in the backyard at 3 o'clock in the morning. I stared at her. I wasn't. She frowned. I heard something at the back window downstairs. I looked out and thought it was you near the fence. My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. "What did you see?" "Not clearly." "Tall shape. Maybe a person." "I don't know." I thought it was you, but then I realized that didn't make any sense. I asked her not to tell the kids. She said, "Tell me what the hell is happening." I couldn't. Not in a way that would make the room safer. That same night one of her kids woke up crying and saying someone had been peeking in from outside the room. The room was on the 2nd floor, there was no tree near that side of the house. That was when the truth finally arrived in full. It had not stayed behind. The apartment had only been where I first learned to recognize it. The tapping had never been a request for entry, it had been a lesson. Part 6. 3 taps follow you anywhere. Once you understand that a thing is not tied to a place, your entire relationship to safety changes. You stop asking, "Where can I go?" You start asking, "How much of me does it know?" I left Jenna's house 2 days later, not because she wanted me gone, but because I could not risk making her home part of the pattern. She argued, her husband argued more quietly, I insisted.
The ugliness of fear is that it makes you choose isolation in the name of protection, and sometimes those are the same thing. I rented a month-to-month apartment in Louisville under the excuse of needing a fresh start. New city, new commute, new grocery store. New gym. New attempt at being a normal American adult man with a bad year instead of a person being followed by something that tapped on windows. I made rules. No uncovered mirrors at night, no sitting in dark rooms with screens turned off. No listening back to recordings, no answering unexplained sounds. No opening curtains after 2:30 a.m. for any reason. No sleeping with the bed angled toward visible glass. No talking about it out loud in the room where I slept. I know how that sounds. But rules are what human beings build when the universe stops behaving reliably. Rules are fences made of ritual. Sometimes they help because they create structure, sometimes they help because they are the only thing standing between you and panic. For a while, the rules worked, weeks passed, then months. I got a hybrid job, I learned the roads, I started recognizing cashiers at the same grocery store. I went on a couple dates and sabotaged both by insisting on sitting with my back to reflective surfaces without explaining why. I began to function. People confuse functioning with recovery all the time. They are not the same. Functioning just means you have learned where to hide the damage while participating in daily life. Most days, I could almost believe I had outrun it. Then, I made the mistake. One hot July evening,
Long after I should have deleted everything, I opened the old phone backup containing the corrupted files from Ohio. I don't fully know why. Maybe because enough time had passed for relief to harden into curiosity. Maybe because I wanted proof I had not invented the whole thing. Maybe because trauma always leaves behind a pathetic little appetite for confirmation. I played the audio file with the clicking. The sound was exactly as I remembered, my breathing in the room, the digital distortion. 3 clicks. Pause. 3 clicks again. But this time I heard something underneath it, a whisper, my own voice, very close to the recording device, saying, "It's not outside." I stopped the file so fast I almost dropped the phone. That night, at exactly 3 a.m., something tapped on my Louisville bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. Second floor. No balcony, no tree, no place for anything to stand. I did not move. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to look, to confirm, to measure, to know. I stayed flat on my back and stared at the ceiling in the dark. The taps came again. Tap, tap, tap. Then a long slow drag down the glass. I started shaking so hard my teeth touched. And in that moment, with terror so strong it had gone oddly cold, I understood the only thing that had ever worked. Not looking, not engaging, not giving it fresh recognition. So I shut my eyes and whispered, "You're not real enough for me." I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I needed language stronger than fear, and disbelief was the only weapon I had left. The tapping stopped. Not gradually. Immediately. I stayed awake until sunrise. When light finally filled the room, I checked the window. 3 smudges on the outside. High up. Too narrow for a normal hand. I cleaned them off without taking a picture. That was the turning point. Not because it ended, because I finally understood the terms. It behaves like a thing at a window because that is a shape the human mind responds to quickly. A watcher outside the bedroom. An intruder at the edge of private space. It uses voices because intimacy is stronger than fear alone. It appears in reflections because reflections let it exist in both recognition and denial. It wants the smallest possible invitation, attention. And the more fully you recognize it, the less it needs the window. I moved again after that. Then once more 2 years later. I have never stayed long in any one second-floor apartment since. I prefer first floors even though part of me knows that's probably symbolic more than practical. I keep curtains heavier than I need. I never place a bed where it faces uncovered glass. I don't play back strange recordings. I don't answer whispers in empty rooms. I don't ask questions at 3 a.m. Most of the time, life is ordinary now, which is its own kind of miracle. I go to work. I pay bills. I text my sister back faster than I used to because fear rearranges your priorities. I meet friends for drinks. I watch baseball. I complain about traffic.
I buy toothpaste and laundry detergent and all the other embarrassingly mundane things that make a human life feel grounded. Most of the time, I almost believe it's over. Then, every so often, I wake on my own at 2:58. No sound yet, just that feeling, the feeling that somewhere close something has arrived for an appointment. I lie still. I do not turn my head toward the window. I let the minute pass if it passes. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes, I hear it. Very soft, very patient. Tap, tap, tap. I never look right away now. That's why I'm telling this story at all. Not because I want anyone to believe in monsters. Not because I want to convince you the world is full of haunted windows and things that learn your life from outside the glass. I'm telling it because if you ever hear 3 soft taps on your bedroom window at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, and you know there is nowhere for anyone to stand,
You will have a moment, very small moment, when you still get to decide what kind of story you are entering. Here is what I have learned. Do not rush to the blinds. Do not go looking for proof. Do not replay the sound. Do not answer the voice if it uses someone you love. Do not assume distance means safety. And whatever you do, do not keep looking until it learns how to stop needing the window. Because the thing outside my window at 3 a.m. was never scariest when it was outside. The scariest moment was realizing it had been teaching me, night after night, exactly how to notice it. And once you learn that lesson, it follows you,